Just an associate's degree. That's what Dr. Mercer had said during morning briefing, his voice cutting through the oxygen-rich air of St. Michael's emergency department like a scalpel through skin. He was talking about someone. He was talking about Ashley Cooper. She didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Just kept moving through Trauma Bay 3, her hand steady as a surgical laser as she prepped the ventilator cart for the 11 a.m. mass casualty drill. 8 months at St. Michael's in Atlanta. 8 months of soft voice and careful hands. 8 months of patients gripping her forearm and asking for her by name, not for Dr. Mercer, not for any of the residents with their polished shoes and their last names embroidered on their coat pockets. Just Ashley. The nurse who didn't rush. The nurse whose touch didn't hurt. The other nurses noticed. They whispered about it. Not the kind way. She carries herself like she earned something she didn't, someone had muttered at the vending machine last week. Soft laughter. The sound of envy wearing a smile. Ashley had kept walking. Always kept walking. The ER smelled like antiseptic and desperation and something underneath, that copper edge of blood that never quite washed away no matter how many times you scrubbed the tiles. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical lullaby overhead, casting everything in that borderless white that made noon indistinguishable from midnight. She'd been working nights for 3 weeks straight. Her circadian rhythm was a memory of a different life. Different life. That phrase was careful. Precise. Like most things about Ashley Cooper. She'd arrived at St. Michael's with credentials that looked thin on paper. Associate's degree from a community college in Fayetteville, North Carolina. 6 years of nursing experience at field hospitals, but the paperwork for those was vague, redacted where it mattered. References from military medical personnel who used only last names and rank. Her security clearance application had taken 4 months and 2 interviews conducted by people who didn't smile and took extensive notes. No one at St. Michael's knew about the classified part. About the Pentagon verification. About the Naval Intelligence Liaison who called twice a year and hung up if anyone but Ashley answered her personal phone. They just saw the associate's degree and made assumptions. The assumptions were wrong. But that was fine. The wrong assumptions kept her invisible. Her locker was in the basement, 3rd row, underneath the fluorescent light that flickered every 8 seconds with the persistence of a dying heartbeat. She kept it neat. Extra scrubs folded with hospital corners. A spare phone in a waterproof case. A photograph of a mountain range at sunset, face down so no one could ask questions about where it was taken. And wrapped in military-grade plastic, a folded American flag. Triangle fold. Perfect creases. The kind of fold that takes practice. The kind of fold that means someone didn't come home. Her hands knew that fold by heart. Had performed it exactly once, 8 years ago, in a room she didn't like to think about during daylight hours. The morning shift was chaos, a bus collision on I-75 had backed up traffic for 6 miles, and every 4th or 5th car had someone hurt enough to need the ER. By 10:44 a.m., she'd placed for 4s, monitored 3 chest x-rays, and held the hand of an elderly woman whose daughter was 30 minutes away and had sounded panicked on the phone. Ashley had just let her keep holding on. That was the thing about being a good nurse. It had nothing to do with your degree. It had to do with knowing when to speak and when to listen. When to move fast and when to slow down. When a patient needed medical intervention and when they needed permission to be scared. The ambulance siren started again around 10:52 a.m. 2 paramedics came through the double doors, the aluminum stretcher rolling with its familiar squeaking rhythm. 37-year-old male. Motorcycle versus delivery truck. Compound femur fracture, possible pneumothorax. Vitals unstable. Ashley moved to the bay without being asked. She always knew which room needed her before the assignment board updated. It was the same instinct that had made her useful in Kandahar. The same instinct that had kept 12 wounded soldiers breathing long enough to reach the airfield. The lead paramedic was a guy named Torres. Grizzled. Maybe 15 years on the ambulance. The kind of weather that comes from seeing the same bad things happen to good people for long enough that you stop expecting anything different. His hand shook as he transferred the patient report to Ashley. Not fear. Adrenaline. The tail end of it, looking for a place to land. Tension pneumothorax, he said. We got the initial breath sounds, but his dropping. BP's 94/56 now. Ashley nodded. Didn't ask questions. She knew the protocol. Knew the patient was heading to the imaging suite to confirm, and if the radiologist was slow, they could lose him to a collapsed lung and cardiac compromise. She was already moving, already pulling the crash cart closer, already positioning her hands for what might need to happen in the next 60 seconds. The patient's oxygen saturation was dropping. 94, 91. 88. Blood gas, she asked. Haven't drawn yet, Torres said. She had an arterial line kit ready before he finished the sentence. Not anticipating. Just knowing. The way a jazz musician knows where the next note goes. The way a fighter pilot reads the sky. The way combat medics know, without being told, which round is the one that kills you first. She was about to swab for the arterial puncture when Torres did something wrong. He reached for the same spot. Their hands nearly collided over the patient's brachial artery. Ashley pulled back with perfect courtesy. Let him have space. Let him do his job. But that pause. That moment where her hands weren't occupied. That was when her eyes went somewhere else, calculating. Looking at the patient's chest wall. At the angle of his shoulders. At the space between the second and third rib, right where the midclavicular line ran like an invisible highway. The space where, if you had maybe 90 seconds and the right needle and absolutely no margin for error, you could push a 14-gauge catheter through the pleural space and let the trapped air hiss out like the last breath of something dying. 3-finger technique. Index and middle finger to find the space. Ring finger to mark it. Then the needle. Fast and sure and no hesitation, because hesitation meant death. She wasn't thinking about it. Her hands just knew the geometry. Torres was drawing from the femoral artery when he went still. Like someone had hit pause on a video. His hand stopped. His breath stopped. He looked at Ashley's chest, at her poised hands, at the careful way she was positioned over the crash cart, at the instrument she'd already laid out in perfect order without being asked. His face went pale. The color drained out like someone had pulled a stopper. You, he said. Whispered. You've done that. Under fire. It wasn't a question. Ashley didn't answer. She was already turning away, giving Torres room, moving to the other side of the cart where she could monitor the EKG strips and stay out of the way. The art of invisibility. The skill that had kept her alive in Helmand Province and kept her employed at St. Michael's. Say nothing. Do your work. Disappear. I watched combat medics in Kandahar use that exact technique, Torres continued, more to himself than to her. His voice had that quality that voices get when someone's world has just rearranged itself. That 3-finger method. You don't learn that in nursing school. You don't learn that anywhere except. He stopped. Looked at her. Actually looked at her, past the scrubs and the soft voice and the associate's degree, and saw something else underneath. Something that had been there the whole time. Ashley's jaw tightened. Just a small motion. The kind of thing most people wouldn't notice. She reached down to adjust the monitor cable that didn't need adjusting. Kept her voice level and quiet and small. Let's get his pressure up, she said. Torres nodded slowly. He didn't ask another question. People who'd seen what he'd seen in Kandahar understood the value of silence. They understood that some answers came with security clearances and briefing rooms and people in suits who took your phone before they talked to you. He finished the arterial draw and stepped back. The radiologist was being paged. The imaging tech was coming up from downstairs. Standard protocol. Standard chaos. The kind of emergency that looked like disaster if you didn't know what you were doing, and looked like a choreography if you did. Dr. Mercer appeared in the doorway at 11:04 a.m., right when the patient's oxygen saturation hit 83. He always appeared at the interesting moments. Always managed to find the high-drama cases. The kind where a decision made in the next 90 seconds meant the difference between an obituary and a discharge summary. He wore his white coat like authority and his expression like judgment, and he moved through the ER the way colonizers moved through territories they'd already decided belonged to them. His eyes found Ashley first. Not the patient. Not the monitors. Not the 4 lines or the equipment or any of the actual work being done. He looked at her, and then at Torres, who was still standing too close, still watching her with that expression of someone who'd just seen a ghost from a previous life and couldn't quite process the implications. Mercer's jaw tightened. Different kind of tightening. The kind that came with suspicion and disdain and a professional arrogance that had been reinforced by every credential and every institution that had ever told him he was smarter than he was kind. He stepped into the bay. Didn't ask for a report. Just started issuing orders in that voice of his, the one that made residents flinch and made nurses remember their place in the hierarchy. Ashley continued her work. Vital signs. Monitoring. Preparation. The invisible choreography of keeping someone alive while people who made more money than you made decisions about how to do it. The oxygen saturation dropped to 81. Mercer turned to her. That cold smile appeared. The one that made her colleagues whisper at the vending machine about humility and knowing your place in the world. Where exactly did you learn to position equipment with such, he paused, finding the word carefully, confidence, Ms. Cooper. That's an associate's degree, correct? The room had temperature and it was dropping. Ashley didn't meet his eyes. Didn't defend herself. Didn't explain. She just kept working, her hands moving with the kind of practiced precision that only came from having done this work in conditions where making mistakes meant counting body bags instead of discharge papers. Her voice came out soft. Careful. Nursing protocols, doctor. Mercer smiled. He turned away like he'd made a point. Like he'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. Like credentials were destiny and bloodlines determined competence, and an associate's degree from rural North Carolina meant you'd never be anything more than a technician following someone else's orders. By 11:17 a.m., the imaging came back. Confirmed pneumothorax. Confirmed the need for immediate intervention. And by then, Ashley had already moved to the next crisis, and the next one after that, because that's what you did when you understood that chaos was just order that hadn't been arranged yet. Her shift ended at 7 p.m. She signed out, changed into street clothes in that basement locker, and paused for exactly 3 seconds with her hand on the plastic-wrapped flag. The weight of it was the weight of 8 years. The weight of a name she didn't say out loud anymore. The weight of a promise made in Kandahar to a kid from Oklahoma who'd wanted to be a mechanic before the Marines found him and made him something else. She touched the flag once. Careful. Respectful. The same way you'd touch a sleeping child, or a wound that hadn't quite healed. Then she closed the locker and went home to her daughter, who was waiting with her homework and a story about something funny that happened in 3rd grade, and for a few hours, Captain Ashley Cooper was just Ashley. Just a nurse. Just a mother trying to remember what normal felt like. But Dr. Mercer was still thinking about that smile he'd given her. Still thinking about the way Torres had looked at her. Still thinking about something that didn't add up on a resume. He was the kind of man who noticed inconsistencies. The kind who made them his business. The kind who was going to start asking questions. And questions, once asked, had a way of becoming very dangerous for people who had secrets. Thursday grand rounds at St. Michael's began like every other Thursday. 23 residents and attending physicians crowded into Conference Room B, fluorescent lights casting everything in surgical white, the smell of antiseptic and stale coffee hanging in the recycled air. Dr. Mercer stood at the head of the crash cart like a general surveying his troops, and his eyes found Ashley the moment she entered. He smiled. That was the dangerous part. Not anger. Smile. He turned to the residents with calculated slowness. Gentlemen, before we continue, I'd like to address a persistent concern with our ED protocols. He gestured to the crash cart. Ashley felt 22 pairs of eyes shift toward her. I want you to observe. Study this moment. Mercer's voice carried the weight of institutional authority, the kind that came from a Harvard MD, a corner office, and 14 years of never being questioned. Our less educated staff sometimes struggle with equipment placement during high-stress scenarios. The results can be catastrophic. He pointed at the defibrillator pads, perfectly positioned exactly where they should be. Can anyone identify what our associate degree nurse has misplaced? Snickers rippled through the room. Residents exchanged glances, unsure if this was a genuine teaching moment or a setup. It was a setup. Ashley took one measured breath through her nose. She did not look away. She did not flush. She did not shift her weight. She simply met his eyes with the flat, steady gaze of someone who had been in rooms far more dangerous than this one, rooms where hesitation meant death, where flinching meant your entire team saw weakness. Mercer's smile tightened. He had expected something different. Tears, maybe. An apology. Retreat. Instead, what he got was her jaw, just a small clench, visible for half a second, then gone. The kind of restraint that felt like a wall made of reinforced steel. I see, Mercer said, turning back to the residents. Perhaps the concept is too advanced for this particular audience. He moved on, but something had shifted. The residents took notes, but their confidence in his teaching had cracked, just slightly. A demonstration works best when the person being demonstrated on reacts the way you predict. Ashley had not followed the script. 2 days later, at the vending machine near the break room, she was reaching for a Diet Coke when she heard them. 2 nurses from the cardiac floor, voices low but not low enough. Sarah and Michelle, women she'd worked beside for 6 months, women who'd watched her stay calm during a code that should have spiraled. Did you see her face during grand rounds? That was Sarah. Like she was actually somebody important. Michelle's laugh came out sharp. Carries herself like she earned something she hasn't. Mercer said it perfectly. The machine dispensed the can with a hollow metallic thud. Ashley stood very still, her fingers wrapped around cold aluminum, the condensation beating against her palm. She could feel them watching her now, waiting for a reaction, embarrassment, anger, the satisfaction of a successful micro-assault. What they got instead was something that surprised even her. A single tear escaped her left eye. Not a breakdown. Not trembling. Just one tear, which she wiped away with the back of her hand with the same precision she would use to clear a weapon. Her voice came out low and steady, each word placed like a weight on a scale. I've earned more silence than you'll ever know. She turned and walked past both of them toward the stairwell, her pace unhurried, her shoulders level. Behind her, Sarah and Michelle stood frozen, unsure if they'd just witnessed a rebuke or a threat, the worst kind of threat, the kind that hints at depths they couldn't fathom. The whispers escalated after that. Not louder. Quieter. Worse. In the break room, conversations would stop mid-sentence when she entered. In the supply closet, she'd catch the tail end of jokes that cut too precise, too personal. One nurse started calling her Nurse Confident when Mercer was within earshot, and the name spread through the ED like a virus. By the following Wednesday, Ashley heard it used in 3 different contexts, always with a smile, always with venom. Mercer seemed to enjoy it. During the morning staff meeting, he referenced her battlefield bravado with practiced condescension, suggesting that her approach to patient care came from watching too many medical dramas rather than actual clinical experience. The room stayed quiet. No one defended her. The silence was complicity. That same afternoon, Ashley questioned a medication order written by the resident under Mercer's supervision. The dose contradicted the hospital's renal protocol, the patient was on dialysis, the math didn't work, and the patient could have ended up with catastrophic hyperkalemia. She raised her hand. She was respectful. She cited the protocol. The dose appears inconsistent with the Mercer cut her off before she finished the sentence. His voice dropped into that dangerous register, the one that meant you'd crossed a line that didn't actually exist until he decided it did. You're suggesting I've made an error? No, I'm suggesting the protocol. I don't appreciate the inference, Nurse Cooper. In fact, I find your repeated questioning of clinical decisions to be insubordinate and disruptive to the team dynamic. He set down his pen. Moved forward slightly. One more outburst like this, and I'll have security escort you from the building. Are we clear? Ashley was clear. 23 other people in that conference room were clear. Clear that you didn't challenge authority in front of residents. Clear that credentials meant everything and expertise meant nothing. Clear that she was, as Mercer had so elegantly phrased it, just a nurse. That night, she sat alone in the locker room at 2 a.m., after her shift, after the fluorescent lights had dimmed, after every other staff member had gone home. She opened her locker. The flag was there, folded into its tight triangular wedge, the way it had been folded for her by a color guard in Dover, Delaware, on a morning that had changed everything. Her finger traced the gold fringe. 12 folds. 12 triangles. Each one representing something: honor, hope, country, sacrifice, all the words that sounded hollow now in a hospital break room in Atlanta where she was being systematically erased by a man who would never know the weight she carried. The mission was clear. Naval intelligence didn't place officers in civilian positions to be visible. They placed them to be invisible. To observe. To gather intelligence on specific patients who might present with symptoms suggesting foreign contact, compromised deployments, suspicious connections. The job wasn't about being respected. The job was about being forgotten. But the cost of being forgotten was hearing yourself called incompetent. Hearing your training dismissed. Hearing nurses laugh about the way you carried yourself, as if dignity was something you could be mocked for. Her hand trembled slightly, just her left hand, the one that had held a rifle for so many years it sometimes forgot how to hold anything else. Not fear. Not sadness. The tremor came from something else. Restraint. The kind of restraint that builds pressure, that compounds, that doesn't explode all at once but instead hardens into something immovable. She closed her eyes and thought about Bagram. She thought about what she had actually earned. Then she put the flag back, closed the locker, and went home to her daughter, who was sleeping, who was safe, who would never know why her mother sometimes held her like she was the most precious thing on earth. Friday morning arrived with the kind of rain that hammered Atlanta like applause, thick sheets of water that turned the parking lot into a dark mirror. Ashley worked the day shift. The ED was quiet, which meant it was about to be loud. At 2:17 a.m. Tuesday would come later, but the pressure was building. Dr. Mercer moved through the department with the swagger of a man who had successfully isolated his target. He'd reassigned 2 nurses who'd shown Ashley respect to the night shift. He'd added extra documentation requirements to her patient charts. He'd made a call to the nursing board, she wouldn't know about it for weeks, suggesting that her unauthorized clinical decisions warranted investigation. She was being dismantled systematically, efficiently, the way you might dismantle a piece of machinery that had no right to be operating in the first place. What he didn't know was that the machinery in question had been built in the deserts of Helmand Province and hardened by the kind of pressure that doesn't break things. It transforms them. The ambulance bay doors burst open at 3:24 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Marcus Webb arrived like a man already halfway to the morgue. 63 years old. Deaf since birth. Multi-system failure cascading through his body like a collapsing building, 5 hours of delayed treatment at 3 different hospitals because none of them could communicate with him. No sign language interpreter. No written documentation. Just a Navy SEAL who'd served 28 years, whose hands had demolished obstacles in Kandahar and Kuna Province, now helpless in a system that couldn't hear him scream in silence. The stretcher squeaked against the tile as paramedics wheeled him past the waiting room. His skin had the waxy pallor of someone whose oxygen was running dangerously low. His chest heaved in that peculiar shallow rhythm that meant his lungs were drowning him from the inside. One of the paramedics called out vitals to the receiving team: BP 89/52, O2 sat 71, heart rate 128, respiratory distress, altered mental status. Dr. Mercer appeared in trauma bay for within seconds, his white coat snapping like a cape as he moved. 3 residents flanked him. 2 nurses Ashley didn't recognize. The usual choreography of controlled chaos, lines being placed, monitors attached, the mechanical hiss of the ventilator priming for intubation. But nobody was talking to Marcus. Nobody was explaining what was happening. He lay there, eyes wide, watching lips move in the fluorescent silence, understanding nothing. Ashley knew 3 seconds after walking in that something was catastrophically wrong. Not the vital signs. Not the respiratory distress. Something the imaging had missed entirely. The way his neck tensed. The way his right shoulder sat lower than his left. The slight bulge beneath his collarbone that looked like nothing but read like everything to someone who'd treated combat casualties with nothing but field equipment and prayer. She moved toward the bedside. Mercer's voice cut across the room without looking at her. "We don't need another set of hands here, Ashley. There's a supply run waiting downstairs." She didn't acknowledge the order. She reached for Marcus Webb's hand instead. His eyes locked onto her face, desperate. She signed slowly, deliberately, her hands moving through the precise geometry of ASL, "I am here. You are safe. What happened to your body?" The relief that flooded his face was immediate and terrible. His hand gripped hers so hard her knuckles went white. His other hand flew up, signing in rapid combat shorthand, the kind of quick, economical signing that came from a lifetime in the military. Tension. Pain. Breathing. Can't breathe. Right side. Pain like a spike through his chest. Ashley felt ice slide down her spine. Tension pneumothorax. The imaging would have missed it because the radiologist was looking for a simple pneumothorax, air in the pleural space. But a tension pneumothorax was air that kept building pressure, compressing the lung, pushing the heart away from center, crushing blood vessels. It was kill fast. It was 5 minutes from cardiac arrest if you didn't decompress the chest cavity. "Dr. Mercer," Ashley said, her voice flat and level. "Tension pneumothorax. Right second intercostal space, midclavicular line." He turned to her with the expression of someone who'd just been interrupted at a cocktail party by a valet. "The X-ray doesn't show. The X-ray shows a simple pneumothorax. He's got tension. Watch his neck veins. Watch his BP dropping. He's compensating, but he won't for long." Mercer glanced at the monitor. O2 sat at 68. Dropping. His jaw clenched. He looked at the residents, then at the nurses, then back at the imaging on the monitor. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, "Get me a 14-gauge angiocath needle. We're going to decompress." But they moved too slowly. Residents fumbled for supplies. A nurse searched the crash cart. Every second that oxygen wasn't reaching his brain was a second of damage that wouldn't reverse. Marcus's eyes were starting to go glassy. His fingers still gripped Ashley's hand, but his grip was weakening. His body was shutting down. His hand dropped to his side. Ashley reached across the bed to the supply tray before anyone else moved. Grabbed the needle herself. Alcohol pad. Antiseptic. She'd done this in a field hospital outside Jalabad with nothing but a needle and prayer and a kid from Tennessee who was bleeding out from a sucking chest wound. This was clean. This was warm. This was a hospital. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for Mercer's nod. Hands moving on their own, muscle memory older than her nursing license, older than her cover, older than everything except the scars on her hands and the weight of that folded flag sitting in her locker 2 floors above. She found the second intercostal space. Palpated the midclavicular line. Felt the anatomy map itself out beneath her fingertips like reading Braille written in blood and bone. The needle went in. The hiss of air escaping from the pleural cavity filled the room like a exhale from a dying man coming back to life. O2 sat climbed, 71. 76, 82. Heart rate dropped. Blood pressure stabilized. Marcus's eyes cleared. His hand gripped the bed rail instead of her, and for a moment his gaze locked on Ashley's face with a recognition that went deeper than gratitude. This woman understood him. This woman spoke his language. This woman knew exactly what it meant when your body was betraying you and the world couldn't hear you scream. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Sinus rhythm. Normal. Beautiful. Alive. Dr. Mercer stood frozen on the opposite side of the bed, the 14-gauge needle still in his hand, unused. His face had gone the color of old concrete. One of the residents had taken a step backward. A nurse had stopped moving entirely. The room smelled like antiseptic and something metallic, ozone, maybe, or just the iron taste of a crisis averted by 3 inches and the difference between knowing and not knowing. Then Mercer's eyes shifted to Ashley. His expression didn't change, but something in the air between them did. Not anger yet. Something colder. Recognition, maybe. The recognition that she'd just done something he would have done in another 30 seconds, and in this room, in this moment, with a patient who would have coded in another minute. 30 seconds was the difference between alive and dead. Get the tube placed, Mercer said quietly to the residents. Prepare for chest X-ray confirmation. We'll need a tube in the chest cavity to drain fluid and prevent reaccumulation. He didn't look at Ashley again. He turned and walked toward the exit, his shoulders moving with a new kind of tension. Not the tension of crisis. The tension of someone who'd just understood that he'd been wrong about what he was looking at, and the mistake had almost killed the patient. Ashley stayed at Marcus's bedside. One of the residents was intubating now, the endotracheal tube sliding past his vocal cords. She held Marcus's hand while they worked, her fingers still steady, her breathing still even, her mind already 3 moves ahead to what came next. Mercer would retaliate. She knew this the way she knew how to read a chest X-ray or predict a shock pattern or understand that a Navy SEAL with a folded flag in someone's locker meant debts owed and missions unfinished. He couldn't accept that a nurse with an associate's degree had seen something 3 experienced residents and 2 seasoned doctors had missed. He couldn't accept that she'd moved faster than he could think. He couldn't accept that she'd been right. The machinery of institutional power would turn now. Slow at first. Then faster. Then with the precision of someone who understood exactly how to dismantle a career from the inside. What Ashley didn't yet know was that the machinery was already turning. That while she held Marcus Webb's hand and breathed the recycled hospital air, Mercer was already walking toward his office. That he was already pulling her file. That within 48 hours, 3 ICU nurses who'd watched her save this man's life would be reassigned to different floors. That her schedule would be altered to isolate her on night shifts with staff he'd carefully poisoned against her. That he would restrict her access to critical patients, citing scope of practice concerns. That he would make calculated phone calls to the nursing board, documenting her unauthorized procedure with clinical precision, building a termination case the way a surgeon builds a case for amputation, methodically, carefully, with the intention of removing the entire limb. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Ashley understood why. Not Mercer's ego, though that played its role. Not his professional pride, though that was certainly wounded. The worst part was that somewhere in the Pentagon's classified systems, in the secure servers of naval intelligence, her assignment to St. Michael's Hospital in Atlanta had a name and a purpose that had nothing to do with nursing. Marcus Webb wasn't just a patient. He was a target. His deployment to Bagram had been compromised, foreign contact during his final tour, suspected intelligence gathering, unresolved security clearance questions that kept him sidelined and monitored. Naval intelligence had placed Ashley here specifically to watch him. To observe him. To identify if he made contact with anyone who shouldn't have his attention. To be the ghost in the ER who could communicate with him in the language of signs, gathering intelligence while the hospital thought she was just a nurse with steady hands. If Mercer suspended her pending investigation, she would be removed from St. Michael's. She would lose access to Marcus. She would fail her assignment. And failure in this world didn't mean a bad evaluation. It meant someone higher than Mercer making decisions about what happened next. Ashley signed to Marcus one more time while the residents finished intubating. "You are going to survive. I will make sure of it. He couldn't speak through the tube now, but his eyes held hers. In that moment, she wasn't sure if he understood her as a nurse or if something deeper was happening, if some part of him recognized that she wasn't just fluent in his language, but fluent in the world he came from. The world where silence meant security. Where invisible meant alive. Where the quietest person in the room might be holding it all together. The machinery of institutional retaliation operates in silence. Dr. Mercer didn't yell or threaten. He simply picked up the phone. By noon that same day, the 3 ICU nurses who had visibly supported Ashley, the ones who'd brought her coffee, who'd consulted her on difficult patients, who dared to suggest her judgment was sound, received transfer notices. Pediatrics. Outpatient surgery. The night shift at the satellite clinic 20 minutes away. The hospital's infrastructure moved like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and bloodless. Ashley watched from the medication station as Rebecca, the senior ICU nurse who'd worked nights beside her for 6 months, carried a cardboard box to her car. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. Rebecca's jaw was set. She didn't wave goodbye. She didn't need to. The next weapon was subtler. Ashley's schedule appeared on the board revised, her shifts now clustered on nights, isolated from the day team that knew her work, surrounded instead by staff who'd been counseled in the hallways by Mercer himself. Don't trust her credentials, he'd said to them. Associate's degree trying to play doctor. Watch her. The night shift nurses, 2 of them recently hired, one with a drinking problem the hospital pretended not to notice, gave her a wide berth. They didn't eat lunch with her. They didn't ask her questions. One of them, a woman named Diane with pinched lips and judgmental eyes, made a point of double-checking every medication Ashley prepared, as if expecting to catch her poisoning patients. The message was transmitted without words, "You are alone here." Mercer's third move was the most calculated. He restricted her access to critical patients. The digital system that controlled patient assignments was his domain, he'd built half of it himself. Suddenly, Ashley's name stopped appearing on the ICU roster, even during her assigned shifts. She was placed instead in the general medical ward, managing stable patients with chronic conditions, watching from a distance as the floor's real work happened elsewhere. It was a cage of irrelevance. A way of saying, without ever saying it, that her judgment was untrustworthy, her skills unnecessary, her presence a liability. Pain is information. Ashley had learned that in field medicine, treating casualties in the dark. Pain tells you what's broken. This pain, the systematic isolation, the severing of every professional connection she'd built, told her something clear: Mercer was moving to the endgame. He wasn't trying to make her quit. He was building a case. The call to the nursing board came on a Wednesday afternoon. She didn't hear about it directly. Hospitals leak. A file clerk mentioned it to the phlebotomist, who mentioned it to a respiratory tech, who mentioned it to Ashley during vitals on a stable patient. They're asking about your credentials. About that SEAL patient. About whether you actually had authorization to do what you did. The information arrived like smoke curling under a door. She knew there was fire, but she didn't know how close. Mercer requested a private meeting in his office at 1,400 hours. She brought her badge, her license, and the steady breath of someone who'd already survived worse things than career destruction. His office smelled like expensive cologne and the artificial lemon scent of cleaning solution. He sat behind his desk like a judge. She stood. "Your suspension is effective immediately," he said, not looking up from a folder. "Pending investigation by the nursing board regarding scope of practice violations. Your unauthorized procedure on the SEAL patient, needlework without physician orders, could have killed him. The procedure saved his life. That's not what the record shows." He smiled then, and she saw it for what it was, the smile of someone who'd already rewritten the record. "As for your patient, Mr. Webb, he requires specialized care moving forward. Staff who can properly assess his condition through appropriate channels. You won't be involved in his care." The words landed with precision. He wasn't just firing her. He was separating her from Marcus. From the mission. From the reason she'd swallowed 8 months of degradation, had let him publicly humiliate her, had made herself invisible. Mercer knew exactly where her pressure points were. He might not know about naval intelligence or Bagram or the real reason she'd been placed here, but he'd found her vulnerability anyway. Separation from Marcus meant mission failure. Mission failure meant reassignment, discharge, or worse, depending on what the Navy decided about a blown operation on his watch. And if Marcus codes again? Ashley's voice was level, controlled, the voice she'd perfected over 8 months. Who communicates with him? Mercer leaned back in his chair. That's no longer your concern. You're suspended, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply turned and walked out, her footsteps measured on the linoleum, her jaw set the way only someone trained to absorb orders without flinching could manage. The door closed behind her. The case file sat on Mercer's desk, building a paper trail of insubordination and recklessness. Perfect. Airtight. Untraceable. 3 hours later, Ashley sat at her kitchen table in the small Decatur rental house she'd rented under her civilian identity. The afternoon light came through thin curtains at an angle that made everything look slightly unreal. She had her hands folded in front of her. She wasn't moving. She wasn't thinking clearly enough to move. The folded flag, the one she kept hidden in the bottom of her locker at the hospital, the physical remnant of a teammate who'd bled out in her arms, was still there. She couldn't even retrieve it without triggering security alerts. The front door opened with the sound of a school day ending. Emma, 8 years old, her daughter, backpack half falling off one shoulder, lunchbox in her other hand. She stopped in the doorway. She had Ashley's dark eyes, her father's careful way of observing the world before trusting it. Mommy. Emma's voice carried the specific confusion of a child encountering something wrong with the adult world. Why are you home? It's not even 4 o'clock. Ashley looked at her daughter. She looked at the kitchen table with its nothing on it, no briefing folders, no laptop, just the raw and obvious fact of a person who'd been removed from their post. She opened her arms. Emma crossed the room and pressed herself against her mother's chest. Ashley could feel her daughter's heartbeat, rapid and uncertain, picking up on something the adults rarely acknowledged, that the world sometimes breaks the people who keep it safe. Is it because of the bad doctor? Emma asked into her mother's shoulder. The question hung there like a physical thing. Ashley closed her eyes. She could tell her daughter the truth in pieces, that Dr. Mercer was being mean, that sometimes adults with power used it incorrectly, that this wasn't her fault. Those were all true statements. But Emma was asking something deeper. She was asking why someone who hurt other people got to keep hurting them. She was asking why the good person, the person who helped people, who came home exhausted from saving lives, why that person was now sitting at the kitchen table in the middle of the afternoon like something broken. Sometimes, Ashley said carefully, grown-ups have jobs with rules that don't make sense. Rules that let other grown-ups hurt people who are just trying to do the right thing. And sometimes the people doing the right thing can't fight back the way they want to, because the rules are bigger than they are. But that's not fair, Emma whispered. No, Ashley agreed. It's not. She held her daughter tighter, feeling the weight of the secret she carried, the uniform folded in military fashion, stored in a place Emma had never been allowed to see. The silver star and purple heart locked in a safe deposit box under a name that wasn't hers. The 8 years of active service before Emma was born, before she'd made the choice to disappear into scrubs and civilian life. All of it, sacrificed for a mission. For a patient. For duty. And now, for the first time in 8 months, she was about to watch that patient suffer because someone had figured out how to weaponize her identity against her. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came at 0330 hours when Ashley's hospital phone buzzed with a message from a number she recognized, the night shift charge nurse, the one who actually still respected her work despite Mercer's campaign. Marcus coded 22 minutes ago. Aspiration event. New nurses couldn't understand his signing. He was trying to tell them about chest pain. Second pneumo forming. We got him back, but he needs you. He keeps signing your name. The message arrived in darkness. Ashley lay in bed, suspended from her position, bound by institutional rules that said if she returned to that hospital she'd lose everything. Career. License. Custody of Emma, possibly, if Mercer wanted to get creative about what her presence meant to her daughter. But Marcus was coding because nobody could understand him. Because she was the only person in that entire hospital who could translate the difference between a deaf patient's breathing difficulty and a life-threatening emergency. She pulled on dark scrubs. She moved through the house like smoke, careful, silent, the way someone moves when they're still operating under combat protocols even at home. She left a note for the neighbor who sometimes watched Emma. She drove to St. Michael's at 0410 hours, the streets of Atlanta empty and gleaming with humidity. The entrance was locked after midnight. But the loading dock, the one used for supply delivery and ambulance overflow, had a door propped open by an orderly she recognized. The same orderly who'd watched her perform the three-finger chest seal weeks ago. He saw her in the darkness and simply stepped aside. No questions. No warnings. Just a small nod from one person who understood hierarchy to another. Ashley moved through the hospital in darkness, using the muscle memory of 8 months of night shifts. The ICU was quiet except for the ventilators and monitors. Marcus Webb's room was at the end of the corridor. She could see him through the window, pale, sweating, his chest rising in shallow gasps. The replacement nurses had him on supplemental oxygen, but they hadn't caught the second pneumothorax developing. She could see it in his posture, the way he was breathing. She could see it in the way he kept signing, his hands moving in patterns they clearly didn't understand, repeating the same signs over and over. She pushed open the door. Marcus's eyes found her immediately, and something in them shifted from panic to recognition. His hand reached out. She took it and moved her other hand in front of his face, using the light from the monitors to sign, "I'm here." "Show me where." His other hand moved to his right chest. "Can't breathe. Pain here." Bilateral breath sounds, she asked the night nurse, already knowing the answer from the sound of his breathing. I'm not sure." "You're not supposed to be here." But Ashley was already moving. She'd opened a 14-gauge angiocath from the crash cart before the nurse finished her sentence. She palpated the second intercostal space, found the landmarks her hands knew as well as her own heartbeat. She didn't ask permission this time. She didn't check for orders that would never come. The needle went in. The hiss of air escaping was immediate. Marcus's breathing eased in real time. His eyes closed. His hand gripped hers tighter, not as a patient gripping a nurse, but as someone who understands being understood. His fingers moved against her palm, signing something rapid and urgent. She read it without looking. "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I've got you," she signed back. The footsteps came from behind her. Heavy and fast. Dr. Mercer's voice, sharp as a scalpel, "Security. Now. She's violating her suspension. Remove her immediately." But Marcus Webb raised his other hand. He pointed at Ashley. He pointed at the now improving oxygen saturation on the monitor. He made a sound from his throat, the sound a deaf person makes when words need to bypass hearing, and spoke with the slow, careful enunciation of someone who'd learned speech from vibration alone. He said her call sign. "Valkyrie," he whispered. "Actual." The word hung in the fluorescent light. The security guards, already moving, stopped. The night shift nurses froze. Dr. Mercer's mouth opened and closed like he'd forgotten how to speak. Ashley Cooper turned to look at him. She stood at full height. She pulled the chain from beneath her scrub top, the one she'd worn for 8 months hidden, and let the silver star and purple heart catch the light. "Suspension rescinded," she said quietly. She wasn't asking. She wasn't requesting. It wasn't a tone that anyone in that room had heard from her before. And in that moment, in the darkness of the ICU at 0440 hours, everything changed. The intercom crackled at 8:41 a.m. A woman's voice, clinical and urgent, human resources to the emergency department. Administrative override Protocol 7. Repeat, Protocol 7. Ashley was restocking the crash cart when she heard it. Her hand stilled. Protocol 7 didn't exist in civilian hospitals. That was military language. That was lockdown language. Two men in dark suits appeared in the ER lobby 15 minutes later. Naval intelligence officers, she recognized the bearing before she recognized the insignia. They moved through the hospital with the kind of quiet authority that made security guards step aside without asking questions. One of them looked directly at her as he passed the medication station. He didn't nod. He didn't need to. The message was clear: we know exactly who you are. The hospital administrator was already in motion. Servers locked. Her personnel file encrypted. Her security clearance, the one buried so deep in classified databases that even her nursing license verification should never have triggered it, suddenly glowed red on every government system that had access to it. Somewhere in a Pentagon database, her real file was being pulled. Captain Ashley Marie Cooper, SEAL Team 3, Charlie Platoon. Dishonorably discharged by cover story. Recruited for deep field intelligence work instead. The lockdown had begun. She finished checking the defibrillator pads with steady hands. Muscle memory. Stay calm. Stay visible. Don't run. The worst thing a covert operative could do was act like they'd been caught. She was still a nurse. Just a nurse with a security clearance that had no business existing in a civilian medical record. 3 hours later, Marcus Webb's condition had stabilized enough that he'd been moved from the ICU to a private recovery room. Ashley was changing his full line when his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His fingers pressed hard. Not aggressive. Urgent. She turned to face him, and his other hand came up in sharp, precise signs. American Sign Language. Military hand alphabet. He was spelling something. VALKYERIEACTUADEL. The room tilted. Her call sign. The one she'd held for 8 years. The one that had been whispered over radio channels in Bagram while helicopters thundered above compounds and dust settled on the bodies of enemies she'd killed to protect the people she was supposed to save. Valkyrie Actual. That was not a name Marcus Webb should have known. That was not a name anyone in the continental United States should have known except the 7 people still alive who'd served beside her. Marcus's jaw worked silently. Then he signed, "I know who you are." The door burst open. A Marine Corps liaison officer stood in the doorway, a folder in his hand. He didn't seem to know what was about to happen. He was just reading protocol, a visiting military representative required to verify medical documentation for a service member. He opened the folder. His voice carried the particular cadence of someone reading official citations aloud. Captain Ashley Marie Cooper, Navy SEAL Team 3, Charlie Platoon. Silver Star for exceptional valor. Citation reads, under direct enemy fire in Bagram airfield, Captain Cooper executed a tactical extraction of 12 wounded coalition forces while maintaining suppressive fire and providing advanced trauma intervention to 3 critical patients. Her actions resulted in 0 loss of life and prevented estimated casualties of 47 friendly personnel. The Marine paused. Purple Heart for combat wounds sustained in service. Subsequent Purple Heart for service-related injuries incurred during the aforementioned operation. Authentication code November 7 Alpha 7902. All decorations verified Pentagon record. He kept reading. His voice didn't shake, but his hands did. Because reading a decoration citation aloud in a hospital room was one thing. Reading it aloud to someone standing in scrubs with an 4-line in her hand was something else entirely. The door exploded inward again. Dr. Mercer stood there, face the color of raw steak, veins bulging at his temples. Theater. Absolute theater. This is fabrication. This is some kind of. A woman in navy dress blue stepped forward from behind him. 2 stars on her shoulder boards. A 2-star general. General Catherine Reeves, Deputy Commander, Naval Special Warfare Command. She moved with the kind of terrifying grace that came from 30 years of command, and she stepped directly in front of Mercer without acknowledging he existed. Her eyes found Ashley. She saluted. A full military salute. Fist to chest. Perfect form. The kind of salute you gave to someone you'd served beside. Someone you'd bled with. Someone who'd led you through hell and brought you home. Captain Cooper, General Reeves said. Her voice was quiet. That was worse than shouting. Quiet generals had ended careers with single sentences. Your decorations are a matter of Pentagon record. Your service is recognized. Your current assignment is classified. Mercer's mouth opened. No sound came out. You're terminated, Dr. Mercer, General Reeves said without turning to look at him. Effective immediately. Your medical license is suspended pending investigation into misconduct, obstruction of military personnel, and tampering with hospital records. You'll be receiving formal notification within the hour. The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. Then the general's phone buzzed. She glanced at it. The smallest smile crossed her face. Dr. Mercer, she said, turning to him for the first time. The IT director has just forwarded the hospital board his security analysis. All of it. Every recording. Every phone call. Every attempt you made to delete evidence of your harassment campaign. Every documented instance of you pressuring staff members to file false complaints. She paused. That was a significant mistake on your part. Mercer backed toward the door. In the IT department 3 floors below, Marcus Chen, Navy veteran, USS Carl Vinson, communications specialist, had been waiting for exactly this moment. When the naval intelligence lockdown hit, he'd understood immediately what it meant. Someone on his hospital staff was operational. Active. Classified. And someone was hunting them. He'd seen it in the way that one floor nurse moved during trauma. The way she assessed situations. The way her hands never trembled even when everything was falling apart. He'd served with operators. He recognized the profile. When Dr. Mercer's access attempt started hitting the security system 2 hours ago, Marcus had already secured everything. Every frame of video from the past 6 months. Every email from Mercer's account. Every phone record of every call he'd made to the nursing board, every conversation where he'd pressured colleagues to manufacture complaints. The security footage showed it all, Mercer in the hallway staging his humiliations, Mercer in his office making calculated calls, Mercer at his computer attempting to delete evidence with the kind of panicked desperation of someone who finally understood he was facing consequences. Marcus had compiled it into a single encrypted file. He'd had a Marine Corps contact from his deployment deliver it to the hospital administrator and the attending admiral. 3 hours of video. 400 pages of documentation. Irrefutable. Mercer stumbled into the corridor, still backward. His phone was ringing. The hospital's legal department. His attorney. Probably both. He looked like a man trying to understand how the ground beneath him had disappeared. Within 24 hours, his medical license was under formal suspension. His insurance company dropped him. 3 malpractice suits materialized, nurses coming forward about his documented harassment. Patients complaining about care they'd received from a physician who'd been so focused on destroying one subordinate that he'd neglected basic patient safety protocols. Within a week, he'd been terminated for cause. The severance agreement included a non-disparagement clause that prevented him from speaking about the hospital, which meant he couldn't even defend himself publicly. Every job application to another hospital triggered the same response: license suspended, ethics investigation pending. Within 2 weeks, he'd accepted a position at a community college teaching CPR certification. $14 an hour. Basement classroom. High school students practicing chest compressions on dummies while Dr. Charles Mercer, MD, showed them hand placement. The career that had taken him 23 years to build had taken 1 week to demolish. But Ashley wasn't thinking about Mercer's destruction when she stood in Marcus Webb's room at sunrise. The city of Atlanta glowed rust-orange beyond the window, the sky shifting from gray to pink. The medical crisis had passed. His pneumothorax was resolved. His lungs were expanding normally. The ventilator had been removed 6 hours earlier, and his blood oxygen was steady at 98%. He would make a full recovery. Marcus pressed something into her hands. The folded flag. The one from her locker. The one she'd carried for 8 years, folded into the precise triangle of military protocol, wrapped in white cloth. The last thing a fallen teammate had asked her to carry. The weight she'd held through every shift, every patient, every moment of invisible service. His hands moved in the precise grammar of American Sign Language. Your teammate. They would be proud. What you did. Who you are. Both. Both. Ashley's fingers closed around the flag. For the first time in 8 months, since she'd walked into St. Michael's Hospital with a fake degree and a buried rank and a mission to watch a deaf Navy SEAL without him knowing, she stood at full military attention. Spine straight. Shoulders back. Breathing measured. The timid nurse who'd absorbed every insult without flinching dissolved into the person she actually was, Captain Ashley Marie Cooper, SEAL Team 3, Charlie Platoon, decorated officer, combat-tested operator, the woman who'd extracted 12 wounded under fire and brought them all home alive. She wasn't invisible anymore. General Reeves offered her reinstatement with a promotion to major. A desk job. Pentagon oversight of classified medical protocols. Comfortable salary. Full honors. Ashley declined. The promotion. The desk. The comfort. Because the mission wasn't finished, and St. Michael's needed someone who understood both combat medicine and covert operations. Mercer was gone, but the hospital's trauma protocols needed rewriting. The nursing staff needed leadership that had actually performed medicine under enemy fire, not theory. The patients needed someone who'd learned the hard way that every person deserved to be treated like their life mattered, because every life did matter. The hospital administrator called her into his office. He apologized. Formally. In front of witnesses. He offered her the position of Director of Emergency Medical Services. Ashley accepted. The nurses who'd mocked her at the vending machine now sought her mentorship. The trauma surgeon who'd questioned her decisions asked to scrub in on her cases just to watch. The veteran orderly asked to buy her coffee and swap deployment stories. He'd served 2 tours in Kandahar. He'd probably seen her work. That evening, in the living room of her Atlanta apartment, Ashley hung her silver star and purple heart on the wall beside her medical certifications. No longer hidden. No longer separate. No longer something to be ashamed of. Marcus Webb learned American Sign Language medical terminology to teach other deaf veterans. The second SEAL in a hospital history to survive a multi-system failure. The first to have someone who could actually communicate with him during his crisis. He visited St. Michael's every month to volunteer, helping deaf patients navigate their own emergency care. And late one night, when Ashley walked through the emergency department carrying the quiet certainty of someone who'd finally stopped hiding who she was, the nurses all turned to watch. Not because she was a captain. Not because of medals or records or Pentagon files. But because the woman in fresh scrubs, moving through the controlled chaos of trauma medicine with steady hands and sharper eyes, was finally the person she'd always been underneath. The one who'd held it all together while the world tried to break her. The one who understood that power wasn't a title. Power was the ability to help. Power was the choice to keep showing up, even when nobody knew who you really were. The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your real value, this story might have hit different. Let us know in the comments, have you ever judged someone only to find out you were completely wrong? Subscribe for more stories about heroes nobody sees until it's too late. Like this video if you're tired of quiet warriors getting overlooked. And if you know someone who carries more strength than anyone around them realizes, tag them below. We see you. The Pentagon sees you. And maybe now, the world finally will too.